My life in New Orleans was a careful arrangement of solitude and quiet contentment. My apartment, tucked away in a peaceful corner of the French Quarter, was my sanctuary. The city's usual clamor softened to a distant hum. Days were spent in my makeshift studio, my laptop glowing, transforming pixels into designs. Nights were for me, books, jazz drifting from the club down the street, the gentle rhythm of a life undisturbed. I valued my routine, the predictability that kept the world's chaos at bay. Then things started to shift. A faint scratching behind the walls that I couldn't explain, a flicker of movement at the corner of my eye, a shadow that didn't belong. The persistent feeling of being watched, even when I knew I was alone. At first I wrote it off. Old building noises, the tricks light plays, the city's lingering energy. But my dreams, they were different. Dark figures lurking in the corners of my room, whispers echoing in empty spaces, a sense of dread that clung to me even after I woke. My apartment, once my haven, started to feel like a trap. The building's familiar creaks turned sinister. The shadows seemed to stretch and deepen. I found myself turning on every light, checking every closet, a knot of anxiety tightening in my gut. The silence, once comforting, now pressed against my ears, heavy and expectant. I'd sit on my couch, a book in my lap, my eyes constantly darting to the darkened corners, listening for any break in the oppressive quiet. I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if my solitude had somehow made me a target. The whisper came on a Tuesday, late. I'd just finished a project, the glow of the laptop screen still imprinted on my retinas, and was winding down with a glass of whiskey. The jazz from the street below was a soft murmur, a familiar comfort. Then, through the music and the gentle hum of the city, I heard it. My name. Ethan. It was low, raspy, like a dry leaf skittering across pavement, and yet it resonated with an unnatural clarity. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I froze, the glass halfway to my lips, my heart hammering against my ribs. I scanned the room, every shadow, every corner, searching for a source. But there was nothing. Just my apartment, quiet and still. I told myself it was my imagination, a trick of the whiskey, a phantom echo of the city. I went to bed, but the whisper lingered, a phantom sound in the back of my mind. The next night, it was clearer. I was reading, trying to lose myself in a detective novel when it came again. Ethan! Closer this time, like someone was standing right beside me. I slammed the book shut, my pulse pounding. I checked every room, every closet, even under the bed, but found nothing. The air felt thick, heavy, as if something unseen was pressing down on me. The feeling of being watched intensified. Shadows seemed to deepen, to move on their own. I started noticing things I hadn't before. A cold spot in the hallway, a faint scent of something musty and old, a sense that the apartment was no longer mine alone. Sleep became a battle, a restless cycle of shallow dozes and sudden awakenings, always with the lingering echo of my name in my ears. The rational part of my mind screamed for explanations, for logic, but the fear was primal, a deep-seated dread that something was very, very wrong. I was starting to doubt my own sanity. Was I imagining this? Was I losing my grip? But the whisper, that insidious, chilling whisper, was too real to be ignored. The nights became a theater of dread. The whispers grew more frequent, more insistent, my name echoing through the apartment like a morbid mantra. I'd lie in bed, rigid, my eyes wide open, straining to pierce the darkness, to catch a glimpse of whatever was calling to me. But there was nothing, just the shadows, and they seemed to have taken on a life of their own. They weren't just shadows anymore. They were shapes, shifting and twisting, mimicking human forms in the periphery of my vision. I'd see a dark figure, standing in the corner of my bedroom, only to have it dissolve into the wall when I turned my head. Sometimes they'd elongate, stretching across the ceiling like dark, spindly limbs. I started to avoid looking directly at any dark corner, any patch of shadow. It was as if they were waiting for me to acknowledge them, to give them substance. One night it got worse, much worse. I was sitting on the couch trying to watch a movie, but my attention was constantly drawn to the hallway, to the long, dark stretch that led to my bedroom. I saw something move at the edge of my vision, a flicker of darkness that wasn't a shadow, not entirely. It was more like a void, a hole ripped in the fabric of the room. It pulsed slowly, and I could feel a coldness radiating from it, a chill that seeped into my bones. Then the object started moving. A book flew off the shelf, landing with a sharp thud on the floor. A glass shattered in the kitchen, the sound echoing through the apartment like a gunshot. The doors to my closet swung open, banging against the wall, revealing nothing but the dark, empty space within. I screamed, a raw animal sound that seemed to get lost in the heavy silence. I wanted to run, to flee the apartment, but my legs wouldn't move. I was paralyzed, trapped in a nightmare. I couldn't escape. I felt a presence close, right behind me. A breath, cold and stale, brushed against my ear. The whisper came again, but louder this time, a guttural rasp that vibrated in my skull. "Ethan!" The darkness in the hallway pulsed again, and I saw a shape forming, a figure emerging from the void. I couldn't make out any details, just a dark, amorphous mass, but I could feel its eyes on me, burning into me. I closed my own eyes, praying for it to be a hallucination, a figment of my increasingly frayed imagination. I was alone, utterly and completely alone, against something that I did not understand, and I was terrified, desperate for answers, or perhaps just a sliver of sanity. I turned to the internet. Late one night, the glow of my laptop illuminating my increasingly haggard face, I began to research. "Paranormal Activity New Orleans," I typed, my fingers trembling slightly. The results were a rabbit hole of ghost stories, urban legends, and whispers of things that lurked in the city's shadowed corners. I found tales of restless spirits, of old burial grounds paved over by modern streets, of rituals performed in hidden chambers beneath the city. But one story in particular caught my eye. It spoke of a dark entity, a presence that fed on fear, drawn to places of isolation and vulnerability. It was said to emanate from a place called the Abyss, a metaphorical and perhaps literal void from which nightmares were born. The description resonated with a chilling familiarity. Then I found a detail that made my blood run cold. My apartment. Building, according to a dusty, forgotten online forum, was built on the site of an old cemetery, a place where slaves and those deemed outcasts were buried. There were whispers of dark rituals performed there, of sacrifices made to appease ancient, malevolent forces, the whispers in my apartment, the shadows, the growing sense of dread. It all started to make a horrifying kind of sense. The abyss wasn't just a metaphor, it was real, or at least something was making it real. Something was opening a doorway in my apartment, a doorway to something dark and unfathomable. The visions started then. Not hallucinations, not exactly, but more like glimpses, fleeting moments where the fabric of reality seemed to tear, revealing something else beneath. I'd see a swirling darkness, a bottomless pit of shadows, and hear the echo of countless voices, a chorus of despair that seemed to claw at my mind. The whisper of my name became a roar, a cacophony of voices calling from the depths. One night I saw it. I was standing in the hallway, staring into the darkness, when the air around me shimmered and distorted. The darkness solidified, forming a shape, a figure that was both there and not there. It was tall, impossibly tall, with eyes that glowed like embers in the darkness. I could feel its presence, a wave of cold that washed over me, a feeling of being watched by something ancient and malevolent. It reached out to me, a hand made of shadows, and I felt a pull, a sensation of being drawn into the darkness, into the abyss. I screamed, a desperate animal sound, and stumbled back, the vision fading as quickly as it had appeared. But the feeling remained, the knowledge that I was no longer alone, that something had found me, and it wasn't going to let me go. The next morning I was gone. I packed a bag, threw my laptop into it, and left the apartment. I couldn't stay there not another minute. The air was thick with a dread that clung to me like a shroud. I felt the entity's presence, a dark, heavy weight on my shoulders, even outside the apartment. I could feel its eyes on me, watching, waiting. I drove. I didn't have a destination, just a desperate need to escape. I drove through the city, then out into the Louisiana countryside, the flat, swampy landscape blurring past my windows, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. The whispers, faint at first, grew louder as the day wore on. They echoed in the static of the radio, in the rustle of the leaves, in the hum of the engine. I stopped at a small, roadside motel, hoping for a moment of respite. But the shadows in the room seemed to move on their own, mimicking the shape I had seen in my apartment. The television flickered, displaying static images of distorted faces and swirling darkness. I turned it off, but the images lingered in my mind, burned into my retinas. I tried to sleep, but the whispers kept me awake. They were inside my head now, a chorus of voices chanting my name, drawing me back to the darkness. I felt a coldness creeping into the room, a chill that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. I saw a dark shape moving outside the window, a figure that was both there and not there, a phantom reflection of the entity that haunted my apartment. I fled again, driving through the night, the headlights cutting through the darkness like twin blades. The road stretched out before me, a ribbon of asphalt winding through the desolate landscape. But there was no escape. The entity was with me, in the car, in my head, a constant, chilling presence. It was feeding on my fear, growing stronger. With every mile, every shuddering breath, I was being hunted, and I was running out of places to run. Desperate, I remembered a story I'd stumbled upon in my frantic online research, a legend of an old voodoo priestess, Marie Laveau's distant descendant, who lived in a secluded cabin deep in the swamps. They said she knew things, ancient things, about the city's hidden darkness. I drove, the whispers a constant torment, guiding me through the maze of cypress trees and murky water. The cabin was old, weathered, but it exuded a strange sense of power. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of herbs and incense. An old woman, her eyes like chips of obsidian, sat in a rocking chair watching me. She knew why I was there. "The darkness follows you," she rasped, her voice like dry leaves rustling. "It has found a crack, a weakness in your world. It feeds on your fear and grows stronger." She told me about the abyss, about the entity that dwelled within, an ancient force drawn to places of pain and isolation. She explained that my apartment, built on a place of forgotten suffering, had become a conduit, a doorway. "You must close the doorway," she said, her eyes piercing mine. "You must confront the darkness, not with fear, but with strength." She gave me a small, intricately carved wooden box filled with strange herbs and powders. "This will weaken it," she said, "but the rest is up to you." I returned to the city, to the apartment, a sense of dread mixed with a strange resolve filling me. The whispers were deafening now, a chorus of voices trying to pull me back into the darkness. I opened the door, and the air crackled with a cold, malevolent energy. The entity was waiting for me, a towering figure of shadows, its eyes burning like red coals. It lunged, its form shifting and twisting, trying to overwhelm me with fear. I threw the contents of the wooden box at it, and it recoiled, hissing, the shadows flickering. I stood my ground, facing the darkness, refusing to yield to the terror. I spoke, my voice trembling but firm, telling it that it had no power over me, that I was not afraid. The entity raged, its form swirling and distorting, but it was weakening. The air grew heavy, the darkness pressing in on me, but I held on. I focused on the feeling of my own presence, forcing it to recognize I was not afraid. After what felt like an eternity, the darkness began to recede. The coldness faded. The whispers turned to silence. And then it was gone. I collapsed to the floor, exhausted but alive. The apartment was silent, the silence heavy but clean. I didn't know if it was truly gone, if the abyss was truly closed, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. The darkness might return, it might always be lurking in the shadows, but I knew now that I could face it. Living alone in this old house, tucked away at the edge of town, had always felt like a strange kind of solace. I'd found a rhythm, a nightly routine that allowed me to feel safe, or at least as safe as I could be in a place that creaked and groaned with the weight of its own history. Every evening, I'd meticulously check each door and window, ensuring they were locked tight, a ritual against the silence that seemed to press against the glass. The shadows inside seemed to deepen the moment the sun went down, and the house became its own little world. Then the shadow started. It began subtly, a faint dark smudge beneath my bedroom door. At first, I dismissed it as a trick of the moonlight, or maybe just some dust I'd missed when I cleaned. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination, heightened by the quiet and the solitude. The next night it was there again, a little clearer this time. I even got down on my hands and knees, peering at it, trying to see if there was some object in the hallway casting it, but there was nothing. The hallway was empty, the dim light from the porch casting long, clean lines. A sense of unease settled over me. It wasn't quite fear, but something close. A nagging feeling that I was being watched, even when I was alone. I found myself staring at the shadow, trying to decipher its shape, to find some logical explanation for its presence. But it was just a shadow. A dark, featureless blob that remained stubbornly still. It never moved, never flickered, just sat there, a silent, unwavering presence at the foot of my door. I started to dread going to bed, dreading the moment I'd switch off the lights and the shadow would materialize. The once comforting silence of the house had twisted into something malevolent, and the shadow, that simple, silent shadow, was becoming the focus of a growing, irrational fear. The shadow became a nightly fixture, an unwelcome guest that I couldn't seem to shake. Every time I turned off the lights and slid into bed, I'd see it, a dark, oblong shape just beneath the door. It was always the same, unmoving, unwavering, as if it were patiently waiting. And I started waiting too, waiting for it to do something, anything. The anticipation was worse than any action could have been. Sleep became a fractured thing, a series of fitful dozes punctuated by sharp awakenings. I'd jolt awake, my heart pounding, my eyes darting to the floor, searching for the shadow. It was always there, a dark stain against the thin strip of light from the hallway. I tried to rationalize it, tried to convince myself that it was just a shadow, an optical illusion. But the feeling of being watched, of being scrutinized by something unseen, grew stronger with each passing night. I experimented, trying to make the shadow disappear. I moved lamps around in the hallway, trying to change the angle of the light. I placed a thick, rolled-up towel against the bottom of the door, hoping to block whatever was casting the shadow. I even got up in the middle of the night, flashlight in hand, and searched the hallway, the living room, every corner of the house, looking for anything that could explain it. But there was nothing. The house was empty, silent, except for the creaks and groans that seemed to amplify in the darkness. The shadow, however, remained unchanged. It was always there, a dark, silent sentinel at the foot of my door. It was as if it were anchored to the floor, a permanent fixture in my nightly torment. The more I tried to understand it, the more I tried to make it disappear, the more it seemed to solidify, to become a tangible presence in the room. My fear, once a small, nagging feeling, began to grow into something darker, something more consuming. I was losing sleep, losing my focus. I was afraid to be in my own bedroom, afraid to turn off the lights. The house, once my sanctuary, had become a prison, and the shadow was my silent, unseen jailer. The night it changed, I almost didn't notice. I was lying in bed, staring at the shadow as usual, my heart pounding in my chest. It was the same as always, a dark, featureless shape. But then I saw them, two small pinpricks of red, glowing faintly in the darkness. Eyes. My breath hitched. In my throat. I sat bolt upright, my body rigid with terror. The shadow wasn't just a shadow anymore. It was something else, something alive, something that was watching me. The red eyes burned into me, their intensity a stark contrast to the darkness that surrounded them. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen, paralyzed by fear. I pulled the covers over my head, trying to block out the sight, but the image of those eyes remained seared into my mind. I squeezed my eyes shut, but I could still see them, glowing, red in the darkness behind my eyelids. I felt a coldness creeping into the room, a chill that seemed to emanate from the shadow itself. Then it moved. Just a small, almost imperceptible shift, but it was enough to send a jolt of terror through me. The shadow was sliding inch by inch under the door, as if it were trying to enter my room. I scrambled out of bed, backing away. From the door, my eyes wide with panic. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking so badly that I almost dropped it. I locked myself in the bathroom, the only room with a lock, and huddled on the cold tile floor, trying to control my breathing. But the image of those red eyes, the feeling of the shadow moving, wouldn't leave me. I closed my eyes, and my dreams were filled with visions of darkness, of a looming figure with glowing red eyes, of the feeling of being watched, of being hunted. The next day I was a wreck. My skin was pale, my eyes were bloodshot, and my hands trembled. I couldn't concentrate on anything. I was trapped in a cycle of fear, replaying the events of the previous night, wondering what the shadow wanted, what it was waiting for, and what it would do next. The house, always large, now felt like a suffocating space, every creak and groan amplified, now that I knew something was watching me. I couldn't live like that anymore. The fear was consuming me, turning me into a shadow of myself. I decided I had to know what was happening, what this thing was that was haunting my room. I started with the house itself, delving into its history, searching for any clues about past owners or strange occurrences. I spent hours at the local library, sifting through old town records and newspaper clippings. The house, I discovered, was much older than I had thought, built in the late 1800s. It had changed hands many times over the years, and there were whispers of strange events, unexplained deaths, and disappearances associated with the property. One particular story stood out, a brutal murder that had taken place in the house, the victim a young woman whose body was never found. The murderer was never caught. A chill ran down my spine as I read the details. The story was gruesome, the descriptions of the crime scene chillingly vivid. And the more I read, the more I felt a sense of dread, as if the house itself were whispering its secrets to me. I found an old journal hidden in a dusty box in the library's archives. It belonged to a former resident, a woman who had lived in the house in the early 1900s. Her entries were filled with fear and paranoia, descriptions of strange shadows and unseen presences. One passage in particular caught my eye. The shadow feeds on fear. It grows stronger with every terrified thought, every sleepless night. It waits, watching, until it has consumed you completely. I recognize the feeling, the growing sense of dread, the feeling of being watched. The shadow was feeding on my fear, drawing strength from my terror. I started to understand. It wasn't just a shadow, a random anomaly. It was something else, something malevolent, something that had been drawn to the house, perhaps even created by the violence that had taken place within its walls. I realized I couldn't just ignore it, couldn't just hide from it. I had to face it, had to find a way to banish it, or it would consume me completely. I knew I was in deep, and that something was very wrong here. Armed with the knowledge I'd gained from the journal and a grim determination I didn't know I possessed, I prepared for a confrontation. I wasn't a religious person, but I found myself drawn to symbols and rituals, anything that might offer protection against the darkness. I bought sage and rosemary, hoping the scent would ward off evil. I drew symbols on the floor around my bed, ancient sigils that the journal described as binding spells. That night I didn't turn off the lights. I sat on my bed facing the door, the small carved wooden box that was mentioned in the journal clutched tightly in my hand. It was filled with some sort of powdery substance. The journal did not specify what, only that when correctly used, it was meant to weaken such beings. I waited, the silence in the house heavy and oppressive. I could feel the shadow's presence, a cold, dark energy that pulsed beneath the door. Then the red eyes appeared. They glowed in the darkness, intense and malevolent. The shadow began to move, sliding further under the door, its form becoming more defined. It was no longer just a shadow. It was a figure, tall and gaunt, with long skeletal limbs. It reached out to me, a hand made of darkness, its fingers long and sharp. I threw the powdery substance from the box, and the shadow recoiled, hissing, a sound like dry leaves rustling in a cold wind. It was weakened, but not defeated. The room grew cold, the air thick with dread. The shadow lunged, its form swirling and twisting, trying to overwhelm me with fear. But I stood my ground, my voice trembling but firm. I spoke the words from the journal, the ancient incantations meant to banish the darkness. The shadow screamed, a sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality. The battle raged, a terrifying clash between light and darkness. I felt my strength waning, the fear threatening to consume me, but I held on, refusing to let the shadow win. I focused on the feeling of my own presence, on the strength of my will, and I pushed back against the darkness with every ounce of my being. Slowly, agonizingly, the shadow began to retreat. The red eyes dimmed, the figure faded, and the coldness began to dissipate. Finally, with a final despairing shriek, the shadow vanished, leaving behind only the lingering scent of smoke and the echo of its tormented cries. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with the lingering residue of fear and the strange metallic scent of the powder I'd used. I was exhausted, drained, my body trembling with the aftershocks of the confrontation. I sank to the floor, my legs too weak to hold me up any longer. The house was quiet, eerily quiet, the absence of the shadow's presence a palpable thing. Spent the rest of the night huddled on the floor, the carved wooden box still clutched in my hand, my eyes wide and alert. I didn't dare sleep, afraid that the shadow might return. But it didn't. The first rays of dawn crept through the windows, painting the room in a pale, fragile light. In the morning, the house felt different, lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted. The air was cleaner, the shadows less menacing. I moved through the rooms, checking every corner, every closet, but there was no sign of the entity. The shadow was gone, but the experience had changed me. I was no longer the same person who had moved into this house, seeking solitude and peace. I had faced a darkness that I couldn't have imagined, a terror that had tested the limits of my sanity. I had seen the true face of fear, and I had survived. I tried to rebuild my life, to return to some semblance of normalcy, but the memories of the shadow, of those red eyes, haunted my dreams. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, my breath ragged. The house remained, a constant reminder of what I had faced and what might still be lurking in the shadows. I learned to live with the fear, to accept it as a part of me. It wasn't a crippling fear, but a constant, low-level hum, a reminder of the darkness that existed in the world, the things that lurked just beyond the edges of perception. I knew that the shadow might return one day, that the darkness might find another way in, but I also knew that I was stronger now, that I had faced the darkness and survived, and that knowledge, that strength, was all that kept me going. Me and David, we finally did it. We bought our own place, a house, not just any house, but like the dream house, you know? Big yard, tons of space, way out of the city. We were so happy it was perfect, like pictures in a magazine, perfect. Big windows, the sun just pouring in. You could see the trees from every room. We spent the first few days just walking around like, this is ours. We made plans for everything, barbecues, parties, even just quiet nights in. It was going to be amazing. But then the quiet started. Not just regular quiet, you know, like the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the house is empty, even when you're in it. It was weird. I'd be in the kitchen making coffee, and it would just be nothing. No birds outside, no wind in the trees, no sound at all. Just this heavy, thick quiet. It was like the house was holding its breath. I mentioned it to David, like, isn't it too quiet? And he just laughed, said I was imagining things, city girl problems, you know, but I wasn't imagining it. It was there all the time. This heavy, silent feeling, like something was off. It was like the house was too still, too perfect, and it started to make me nervous. The quiet, it didn't go away. It got worse, actually, like it was heavy, you know? Pressing down on everything. Even when we tried to make noise, it was like the house just swallowed it up. We put on music, turned up the TV, tried talking really loud, but it was still there. This thick, dead silence. Sleeping got hard, like really hard. We'd lie in bed, and all we could hear was nothing, just this empty, echoing quiet. It made my skin crawl. It felt like something was wrong, seriously wrong, like the house wasn't breathing. David tried to be cool, you know, said I was overreacting, but even he started to get weirded out. He'd stop talking in the middle of a sentence, like he was listening to something, but there was nothing to hear, just that awful quiet. We started to avoid certain rooms, the living room especially. It was huge with these big windows, but it felt cold, empty, like something was missing. We'd sit there trying to watch a movie, but we'd end up just staring at the screen, not even paying attention. The silence was just too loud. It was like the house was holding its breath, waiting for something. And that something, whatever it was starting to get to me. I felt jumpy, on edge, like I was waiting for something to happen, something bad. I'd walk through the house, and I'd get this feeling, like someone was watching me. But when I turned around, there was nothing, just the silence, the heavy, dead silence. It started to feel like the silence itself was a thing, a presence, and that thing, it was making me scared. Then the whispers started. It was like a feeling at first, not like actual words, you know, just this low, humming sound, like someone was talking just out of earshot. I turned my head, thinking David was saying something, but he'd just look at me like, what? They were always there, little bits of sound, just below what I could hear. I'd be doing dishes, and I'd catch a word or a sound. It was like someone was talking in another room, but there weren't other rooms. It was just us in the house. I started to think I was going crazy, like seriously. I'd ask David, "Do you hear that?" And he'd shake his head, like I was losing it, but I wasn't. They were real, these tiny little voices all the time. It made me jumpy. I'd be walking through the house, and I'd just stop, listening, trying to catch what they were saying, but I never could. And then there were other noises, little things, scratches, bumps, whispers when I was alone in a room, like the house was trying to talk to me, but I didn't know what it was trying to say. It felt like the house was alive, like it had something inside it, something I couldn't see but could feel. A presence, something dark. It was like being in a room with someone, and you can't see them, but you know they're there, and they're watching you. I started to get really scared, like I'd be in the kitchen and I'd feel someone behind me, but when I'd turn around, there was nothing, just the empty room and the whispers, the quiet whispers. They were always there. We had to know. We couldn't live like that, not knowing what was going on. So we started looking into the house. I mean, really looking. We went to the town hall, searched old records, anything we could find. It was weird, like digging up old secrets. Turns out the house had a lot of owners, and bad stuff happened. Here, like accidents, disappearances, even deaths. It was like the house was cursed or something. I found this old newspaper article about a guy who lived here years ago. He went missing, just vanished. And before that, his wife, she fell down the stairs, broke her neck. It was called an accident, but I don't know. We found this old diary too. It was buried in the attic, hidden behind some loose floorboards. It belonged to some guy who lived here like 100 years ago. He wrote about the same things we were hearing, whispers, noises, the feeling of being watched. He wrote about how the house was alive, that it had a presence, the worst part. We asked around town, just casual, like, "Hey, we're new to the area, tell us about the neighborhood." And people got weird. They'd look at the house, then at us, like we were crazy. Nobody wanted to talk about it, but we got bits and pieces. Enough to know that the house had a bad reputation. People called it the silent house, said it was a place you didn't go after dark. It was like a bad feeling, like we'd moved into a haunted house, like in the movies. But this was real. This was our life, our dream house, and it was turning into a nightmare. We realized we weren't just hearing things. We weren't going crazy. The house had something bad, and it was watching us. It wasn't just sounds anymore. It was a feeling, like someone was watching us all the time. I'd be in the kitchen, and I'd feel eyes on me, even though no one was there. David felt it too. He'd look over his shoulder like he expected to see someone standing behind him. Things started to move. Not big things, just little stuff. A book falling off a shelf, a door creaking open, even when there was no wind. It was like little hints, like the house was trying to show us something we weren't supposed to see. The shadows got longer, darker. They seemed to move on their own. I'd see them out of the corner of my eye, shifting, changing shape. It was like the house was playing tricks on us, trying to scare us, and it was working. We started to avoid certain rooms, like the attic and the basement. They were dark, cold. We couldn't even go there anymore. It felt wrong, like something was hiding in the shadows, waiting for us. It was like the house was a trap, and we were stuck inside. We couldn't sleep. We couldn't eat. Every noise, every shadow, it was all part of the house, part of whatever was in there with us. We were trapped. We knew we had to leave, but it was like the house didn't want us to go. It was like it was holding us there, keeping us in its silent grasp, like it was enjoying scaring us, enjoying watching us slowly lose our sanity. We decided to fight back. We weren't going to let the house win. We gathered everything we learned from the diary, from the old stories. We found out that whatever was in the house, it was trapped, like it couldn't leave. It was bound to the house, stuck there because of something bad that happened a long time ago. We tried to talk to it, like seriously. We went into the living room and just yelled. We said we weren't afraid. We told it to leave us alone. It was weird, I know. But we were desperate. It got worse. The noises, the whispers, they were louder now. The shadows were moving like they were trying to grab us. The house was angry. It felt like it was going to explode. We found a way to release it. We used what the diary said, an old ritual, something about letting it go. It was crazy, like something out of a movie. But it was our only chance. It was hard, really hard. The house fought back. It was like it didn't want to let go. But we did it. We freed it, whatever it was. The house was different after that. Still silent, but not like before. More like empty, like the silence had left with whatever we released. We didn't stay. We couldn't. We packed everything and left. We left the dream house behind. It wasn't a dream anymore. It was a nightmare. We never looked back. We just wanted to get away, as far as possible. I still hear the silence sometimes, in my head, and the whispers. I don't think they'll ever go away.